This is Unit 1, Literacy Foundations, Lesson 4, Determining the Controlling Idea. So in this lesson, we're going to start about the comprehension competencies. These are skills that we want to develop fluency in, and there's also concept knowledge in this set of competencies. So we want to make sure that we understand terms like controlling idea, supporting ideas, tone, register, the moral and ethical stance, and the author's purpose. Today we're going to talk about the 4 that are highlighted there. They're all kind of interrelated in this idea of what a controlling idea is. And hopefully by the end of today's lesson, you'll be able to say concept knowledge is clear for these things. So you understand what these terms mean and what these concepts are. We're going to talk about what we mean by the controlling idea. We're going to look at 4 different types, and then we're going to do a step-by-step process to help us determine the controlling idea of a nonfiction text. Looking ahead, just be aware that we will talk about controlling idea as readers, like we're doing today. And as writers, especially with the next unit, we're going to start seeing how we can use the idea of a controlling idea to help us write more effective texts. So in a nutshell, the controlling idea is the term that we use for the reason that the text exists. So the reason why it was written in the first place and the way that it was developed, how it was created. We figure it out by analyzing things like the intended audience, the form that was chosen, the main idea, so the subject or the topic of the text, and then what is said about it. And then what we can figure out from the author's purpose. If we want to get really complicated with it, you can bring in all sorts of things to help you figure out what the controlling idea of the text is. So far our definition of the controlling idea is pretty vague and pretty useless. I think that talking about these related terms, these types of controlling ideas, theme, thesis, dominant impression, and unifying effect will help us put it into more concrete terms. So let's start with the ones that we already know. Theme is how we refer to the controlling idea of many literary texts. It's the idea or the belief that the text suggests is true and important about human nature. Theme is usually implied in the text and is developed by details in the text according to genre. So in a narrative, the ideas of plot and story lend themselves to theme, as an example. The idea of a thesis is the controlling idea of usually persuasive texts. So like your critical analytical essays that you'll write. University dissertations and research studies also use a thesis. And the controlling idea of these kinds of texts is the main idea about the subject that the text is going to argue is true. So theme is usually stated explicitly and is developed by points that are also called claims and arguments and evidence. So if we go back to those vague definitions that we had before, think about how the form, like narrative texts or persuasive texts, and the author's purpose, like to entertain or inspire or to persuade, and then what the idea is about the topic or what the idea is about what happens in the text, how all of these things help you find the theme and the thesis. Okay, so the 2 maybe new terms are dominant impression and unifying effect. Now these are a little bit more versatile than theme and thesis because you can apply them to a broader range of texts. And you can apply them to texts that do have a theme or texts that do have a thesis. So you could talk about a story having themes and also some dominant impressions. So a dominant impression is a term that's used for descriptive writing usually, such as descriptive essays, profiles, and literary texts. And the dominant impression is a characteristic about the subject that is emphasized by the text. So it could be the way that a person or a character is represented, and it could also be the atmosphere of the setting. If you look at this example here, this is a painting by Norman Rockwell from 1959, I believe that says. You can see the details of the painting, the colors chosen, the positions of the people. There's a dominant impression that's given of the woman's personality. And also there's a dominant impression of the atmosphere of the setting. We're going to pause the video here so that you can think about it a little bit and reply to these questions. Okay, and the last term that we're going to introduce today is called unifying effect. This term was actually invented by Edgar Allan Poe. He's the guy who wrote The Raven and The Cask of Amontillado and a bunch of those creepy horror stories that have become iconic. And his theory in writing short stories was that if you're going to read something in a single setting, it should have one single effect on you. And that the job of a writer was to make sure that all of the elements in that short text should contribute to that single unifying effect. So in a short story or a song or a poem, this unifying effect might be a mood. But we'll also talk about unifying effect in our own writing so that each of our texts has this sense of unity. So take a moment to do a little bit of retrieval practice and think about this definition that we started with again. The controlling idea is the reason the text exists. It's why it was written and how it was created. And think about how that plays out when we're talking about theme, thesis, dominant impression, and unifying effect. You might have to pause and go back or open up the... Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to determine the controlling idea for the nonfiction text that we're reading in this unit. And we're going to do it with these 4 guiding questions. What is the main idea of the text? So what is the subject and what's important about the subject, what's being presented? What is the author's goal or purpose in writing this text? What can we see the author doing that tells us what their intention is? According to this text, what matters most about the subject? That's kind of hinting at the dominant impression idea. And what is the audience meant to think or feel? So thinking about the dominant impression or the unifying effect here. We're going to do this with the cape and the masks. What is this text about? What is the main idea of this text? There's more than one possible answer here, but you'd say the subject, the concrete thing that this text is talking about is the fact that bullfighting has started again. And the thing that the main idea about that is that bullfighting is very different now that we live in a COVID-19 world. What is the author's goal or purpose? According to the text, what matters most about the subject? If you go back to the text and you look, there's a lot of description and examples. So the author's purpose, I would say it's to describe. And what matters about the topic, about the subject, is that bullfighting doesn't seem to have the same excitement as it used to. So I was able to answer this question, what matters about the subject, by first realizing this is what the author did in the text most of the time, and to think about what kinds of things they were describing. And in the end, what is the audience meant to think or feel? So why was this text written? The mood is somber. There's a bit of a unifying effect of things. All of these changes feel kind of surreal and strange, and no one's really quite sure what to do about them. And the dominant impression that I got from this text was this kind of unspoken feeling of maybe that there are some things that will never return to normal. So in our next lesson, we're going to talk about how to pull all of these steps together into a summary. But if you can answer all of these questions about a text and spend some time thinking about it, the next step will be very easy. For today's activity, open the practice determining the controlling idea slides from the Google Classroom assignment. Choose either the TikTok article or the the posthumous albums article, and then work through the guiding questions just like we did in this example. You can work alone or with a partner. Submit the assignment on Google Classroom when you're done.